Modern slavery is not a dark chapter locked in history books. It is a living reality unfolding around us right now. In 2024, more than 40 million people worldwide remain trapped in systems of exploitation that strip away freedom, dignity, and hope. While many believe slavery ended generations ago, the truth is far more uncomfortable. It has simply changed its form, hiding behind borders, supply chains, and silence. In places like Libya, migrants searching for safety and opportunity are instead caught in cycles of forced labor, deception, and abuse. These are not distant stories happening in isolation. They are connected to our everyday lives in ways we rarely stop to question. The phone in your hand, the clothes you wear, the food on your table, some of these comforts may carry unseen human suffering behind them. Modern slavery thrives not because people approve of it, but because it often remains invisible. This story is not about shock for the sake of shock. It is about awareness. It is about understanding how poverty, conflict, displacement, and weak protections create the perfect conditions for exploitation to flourish. It is about recognizing that modern slavery affects men, women, and children across continents, with Black communities in Africa carrying a disproportionate burden of this injustice. As you listen, keep one question in mind: how can something so widespread remain so ignored? The answers are complex, but they matter because silence allows exploitation to continue, while knowledge has the power to disrupt it. If you believe these conversations are important, take a moment to support the channel. Like this video, subscribe for more thought-provoking content, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Awareness is the first step toward change, and change always begins with people who choose not to look away. The reality of modern slavery becomes even more unsettling when we realize how closely it is woven into the systems that sustain our daily lives. After understanding that millions of people remain trapped in exploitation today, the next uncomfortable truth is this: modern slavery does not exist on the margins of the global economy. It sits at its very center. It moves quietly through international supply chains, crossing borders and oceans, transforming human suffering into ordinary consumer goods. Far from the chaos of conflict zones, exploitation often begins in places that appear routine and productive. In mineral-rich regions, children descend into narrow mine shafts before they are old enough to understand what childhood is meant to be. Their small hands extract resources essential to modern technology, working long hours under dangerous conditions for little or no compensation. These minerals travel through layers of intermediaries, cleaned of their origins, until they emerge as components of devices that symbolize progress and innovation. The final product looks harmless, even empowering, yet its journey tells a far more troubling story. In another part of the world, factory lights remain on long after midnight. Garment workers labor in crowded rooms where safety is an afterthought and exhaustion is normal. Many are trapped by recruitment debts or false promises, unable to leave without risking retaliation or financial ruin. The clothes produced in these factories are designed to be affordable and disposable, feeding a cycle of constant demand. Each new trend moves faster than the lives of those forced to keep up with it. Their labor reduced to a hidden cost that rarely appears on price tags. The story continues in fields and construction sites, where forced labor is often normalized through silence. Agricultural workers harvest food under extreme conditions, sometimes having their documents withheld, their wages delayed or denied entirely. Construction laborers build roads, stadiums, and cities they may never benefit from, bound by contracts they did not fully understand and rules designed to keep them dependent. These industries rely on invisibility, on the assumption that those at the bottom will endure without being seen. What connects all these places is not just exploitation, but distance between producer and consumer, between suffering and comfort. Global supply chains are designed to be efficient, not transparent. Each additional layer makes it easier to deny responsibility, to claim ignorance, to believe that harm happens somewhere else. Yet the system functions precisely because that harm is absorbed by those with the least power to resist it. This is how modern slavery sustains itself in plain sight. It does not require public approval, only indifference and complexity. It survives because the people who benefit from the final product rarely encounter the people who paid the real price. Understanding this connection does not mean rejecting progress or modern life, but it does demand a more honest reckoning with how prosperity is built. When exploitation is embedded into the structures we depend on, confronting it becomes not just a moral choice, but a collective responsibility. As the story of modern exploitation unfolds, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Women and children bear the heaviest weight of this hidden system. While exploitation touches many lives, it is often shaped by power imbalances rooted in age and gender, turning vulnerability into opportunity for those who profit from control. Within the same global structures that quietly benefit from forced labor and invisible supply chains, women and children are pushed even further into the shadows. For many girls, exploitation begins before they are old enough to imagine a different future. In communities where poverty narrows every option, childhood is shortened or erased altogether. Education becomes a luxury, and survival becomes the priority. Some children are sent to work to support their families, only to find themselves trapped in labor they cannot escape. Others are promised safety or opportunity, but instead encounter systems that bind them through fear, obligation, or debt. Once caught, leaving becomes nearly impossible, not because doors are locked, but because every path forward carries risk. Women often face a different but equally devastating reality: economic inequality. Displacement and discrimination place them at a disadvantage long before exploitation occurs. When conflict or crisis uproots families, women are frequently left responsible for survival with limited resources and little protection. In these moments of desperation, deceptive offers of work or marriage appear as lifelines. Over time, those promises reveal themselves as traps designed to remove autonomy while maintaining the appearance of consent. What looks voluntary on the surface is often shaped by coercion beneath it. Debt bondage is one of the most effective tools used to maintain this control. Small loans, recruitment fees, or travel costs are inflated and weaponized, creating obligations that can never truly be repaid. Women and children are told they must work longer, comply more fully, or sacrifice personal freedom to clear a debt that keeps growing. The system is carefully designed to appear lawful, even routine, allowing exploitation to continue without drawing attention. Forced marriage adds another layer to this reality, especially where tradition and hardship intersect. In some regions, girls are married at a young age not out of choice, but as a means of reducing financial pressure or ensuring protection. Once married, their lives are no longer their own, and expectations of obedience replace the possibility of education or independence. What is framed as cultural or economic necessity often conceals a profound loss of agency. What makes these experiences especially devastating is their isolation. Victims are frequently separated from support networks, unfamiliar with their rights, or silenced by fear of consequences. The same systems that rely on their labor also rely on their invisibility. Their stories rarely reach beyond local boundaries, and when they do, they are often dismissed as exceptions rather than symptoms of a larger pattern. This vulnerability is not accidental. It is structural. When societies fail to protect women and children through education, legal safeguards, and economic opportunity, exploitation fills the gap. Modern slavery does not require chains or public markets to exist. It survives through imbalance, secrecy, and the quiet normalization of suffering. Understanding this reality brings the story of modern exploitation into sharper focus. Women and children are not merely victims of circumstance. They are targeted precisely because their voices are easiest to silence. Recognizing their experiences is not just an act of awareness. but a necessary step toward breaking a system that depends on their vulnerability to survive. As the lens widens to Africa, the story of modern slavery takes on a deeper and more painful dimension, one shaped by history as much as by present-day realities. The patterns of exploitation seen across the continent are not random. They often follow racial, ethnic, and caste-based lines that were etched into societies long before the modern world took shape. These divisions, reinforced over centuries, continue to influence who is protected and who is exposed, who is believed and who is ignored. Colonial rule did more than extract resources. It ordered social hierarchies, elevating certain groups while marginalizing others. Borders were drawn without regard for ethnic realities, and labor systems were imposed that normalized coercion and control. When colonial powers withdrew, they left behind fragile institutions and deeply unequal societies. In many places, these structures were never dismantled, only renamed. Today, exploitation thrives in the cracks left by that unfinished history. In several regions, entire communities inherit vulnerability at birth. Their social status limits access to land, education, and political representation, making exploitation feel less like an anomaly and more like a continuation of what has always been expected of them. Children grow up watching their parents work for others without pay or protection, learning early that freedom is unevenly distributed. This inherited inequality blurs the line between tradition and abuse, allowing practices rooted in domination to persist under the cover of custom. Racial and ethnic targeting intensifies during moments of instability. When conflict erupts or governments weaken, marginalized groups are often the first to be displaced and the last to receive protection. Displacement strips people of documentation, community ties, and bargaining power, leaving them exposed to those who exploit desperation. In these moments, old prejudices resurface with new force, defining who can be exploited without consequence. What follows is not chaos, but a predictable pattern where power flows in one direction and suffering in another. Caste-like systems further complicate the picture. In some societies, labor roles have been rigidly assigned for generations, turning exploitation into a social expectation rather than a crime. Those at the bottom are expected to serve, to obey, and to endure. When laws exist, they are unevenly enforced, often protecting those with influence while leaving others unseen. The result is a form of modern slavery that does not always require secrecy, because it has been normalized over time. The impact on Black Africans is especially severe, not because vulnerability is inherent, but because systems have been built to concentrate risk along racial and ethnic lines. Migration routes, labor markets, and informal economies often reflect these inequalities. People from marginalized backgrounds are offered the most dangerous jobs, the least secure arrangements, and the fewest paths to justice. When abuse occurs, their complaints are less likely to be taken seriously, reinforcing a cycle that discourages resistance. What makes this reality particularly difficult to confront is its familiarity. Exploitation does not always arrive as an obvious rupture. Sometimes it looks like continuity. It resembles the past closely enough that it blends into the present, making it harder to challenge. Yet beneath this appearance of normalcy lies a profound violation of human dignity, sustained by silence and unequal power. Understanding modern slavery in Africa requires acknowledging this historical weight. It is not enough to view exploitation as the result of poverty alone. Poverty matters, but it operates within a framework shaped by race, ethnicity, and inherited disadvantage. Until those deeper structures are recognized, efforts to address exploitation risk treating symptoms while leaving causes untouched. This part of the story reveals why modern slavery remains so resilient. It adapts, drawing strength from unresolved histories and entrenched inequalities. And as long as these patterns remain unexamined, the burden will continue to fall most heavily on those who have carried it for generations. As the story moves forward, it becomes clear that modern slavery does not exist in isolation. It grows strongest where societies are already under strain, where instability weakens protection and desperation erodes choice. Conflict, political upheaval, poverty, climate pressure, and mass displacement do not merely coexist with exploitation. They actively shape the conditions that allow it to thrive. Together, they form a landscape where vulnerability is widespread and accountability is scarce. When violence erupts or governments fracture, daily life becomes uncertain overnight. Families are forced to flee with little more than what they can carry, leaving behind homes, livelihoods, and support networks. In these moments, survival takes precedence over safety. People seek any path forward that promises stability, even if the risks are unclear. This is where exploitation often enters quietly, disguised as opportunity. Offers of work, transport, or shelter appear just when options have disappeared, and the line between rescue and manipulation becomes dangerously thin. Political instability further weakens the systems meant to protect people. Law enforcement may be under-resourced or compromised, while courts struggle to function at all. In such environments, those who exploit others face little resistance. Corruption deepens the problem, turning protection into a privilege rather than a right. For displaced individuals without documents or legal status, reporting abuse can feel more dangerous than enduring it. Silence becomes a survival strategy, and exploitation continues unchecked. Poverty weaves through all of this, tightening its grip with every crisis. When income disappears and prices rise, families are forced to make impossible decisions. Children may be sent to work earlier than planned. Education may be abandoned, and migration may seem like the only escape. These choices are rarely free. They are shaped by necessity. Exploitative systems rely on this pressure, knowing that hunger and uncertainty can override caution. What begins as a temporary solution often becomes a long-term trap. Climate change adds another layer of instability, one that unfolds gradually but relentlessly. Droughts, floods, and unpredictable seasons undermine agriculture and local economies, pushing entire communities toward displacement. As land becomes less productive and resources scarcer, competition increases and tensions rise. People who once relied on their environment for survival are forced to move, often into unfamiliar regions where they lack connections or protection. Each climate-driven displacement expands the pool of people vulnerable to exploitation. Mass displacement transforms vulnerability from an individual condition into a collective one. Camps meant to offer refuge can become overcrowded and underfunded, unable to meet basic needs. Outside formal systems, informal labor markets emerge, offering work without safeguards. In these spaces, exploitation blends into daily life, normalized by necessity and exhaustion. The longer displacement lasts, the harder it becomes to imagine a return to stability, and the easier it is for abuse to take root. What connects all these forces is not chaos, but predictability. Exploitation follows patterns shaped by instability and inequality. Where protection weakens, control strengthens. Where hope fades, risk becomes acceptable. Modern slavery feeds on moments when societies are least able to respond, embedding itself into crises rather than standing apart from them. Seen together with the earlier threads of this story, these conditions reveal why modern slavery persists despite global awareness. It is not sustained by a single cause, but by the convergence of many pressures acting at once. Conflict displaces. Poverty constrains. Climate change accelerates, and weak governance fails to intervene. Within this convergence, traffickers find opportunity, and the vulnerable are left navigating a world where survival often comes at an unbearable cost. As this story draws to a close, one truth stands out clearly. Modern slavery continues not because the world is unaware of it, but because the systems meant to stop it are still too weak to match its scale. Across regions and borders, Governments and international organizations have taken important steps. Laws have been written, agreements signed, and task forces established. These efforts matter, and they reflect genuine progress compared to the silence of the past. Yet for millions of people still trapped in exploitation, progress often feels distant and incomplete. Weak enforcement remains one of the greatest barriers to real change. Laws without action offer protection on paper but little safety in practice. In many places, those responsible for exploitation operate with confidence, knowing that investigations are rare and consequences uncertain. Corruption further erodes trust, turning justice into a transaction rather than a right. When accountability depends on influence or wealth, survivors are left with few options and even fewer reasons to come forward. Their suffering continues quietly, hidden behind procedures that were meant to protect them. Support for survivors is another critical gap. Escaping exploitation is not the end of the struggle. For many, it is only the beginning. Without access to safe housing, medical care, education, and economic opportunities, survivors risk being pulled back into the same conditions they fled. Recovery requires more than rescue, it requires long-term commitment. Too often, systems focus on stopping crimes while overlooking the people most affected by them. When survivor support is limited or temporary, exploitation simply reshapes itself and continues. At the same time, responsibility does not rest on governments alone. Businesses, institutions, and consumers all play a role in shaping the world that allows modern slavery to persist. Transparency in supply chains, ethical labor practices, and informed choices matter more than ever. Awareness is not passive knowledge. It is the foundation of accountability. When people understand how exploitation operates and where it hides, silence becomes harder to justify. This story has shown that modern slavery is complex, deeply rooted, and sustained by overlapping forces: history, inequality, conflict, and indifference. But complexity does not make it inevitable. The same global connections that allow exploitation to spread can also be used to challenge it. Change begins when awareness turns into pressure, and pressure turns into action. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story and engage with a reality that is often uncomfortable, but deeply important. If you found this discussion meaningful, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more in-depth conversations that explore the world as it truly is. Sharing awareness is one of the most powerful tools we have. Together, by staying informed and refusing to look away, we can help push the world closer to dignity, justice, and freedom for all.